Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Elseworlds Exchange. I am Sal, and I'm joined today by the indomitable Ron Marz. Thank you so much for being on the show, man.
No worries. It's not like we're going anywhere. So,
No, yeah, you are a captive audience.
Everybody's a captive audience right now.
That's right. No, I'm talking everybody. You are all a captive audience. Chiefly among them, Mr. Ron Marz. We've never actually interacted outside of one interaction, and I find that kind of baffling, given how many books I've talked about of yours on this channel and how influential you are in the industry itself. But yeah, I don't know if you remember, but literally, like, I think this past Baltimore Comic-Con, I got you to sign one of my Green Lantern books. No, it was like, I think 1,000 people.
I'm not going to lie and say, oh yeah, I remember that.
Exactly.
No, because that would be a lie.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've signed one or two Green Lanterns in my time.
Yeah,
like at shows now, I actually know what books people are bringing up if they're holding them like this with the back of the book, the back cover of the book toward me.
Right.
I know what issue it is because I recognize the ads on the back.
Yes, you're like, oh, it's Zit Fighters from Outer Space. I know who that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, so there's so many avenues we could take because right now we're kind of in this weird place in the comic book industry. But there's also comments that were made by Gail Simone that I really want to get into because she's advocating for a DC Marvel crossover again. And you're kind of at the epicenter of the original DC Marvel crossover. And so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that, just if you're down, because DC versus Marvel, sales juggernaut, if not utterly ridiculous. But I think one of those like necessary injections into the industry at the time. And I could see the parallels being like, oh man, comic book stores are closed.
Yeah, by far. I mean, that was the original impetus behind DC versus Marvel in the first place, was that the direct market crashed after the speculator boom, and the stores needed a product to get people back into the stores, and also, obviously, we sold a ton of them. So,
right.
The deep dark secret of comics, right? It's the shotgun marriage of art and commerce.
Yes.
The whole reason behind what publishers do is they're there to sell copies. That's what, that's the business they're in. I don't know that creators feel like, oh, what story can I tell that will sell the most? I don't think that's the way most creators approach it. Obviously, we want to sell books, and we want to, because that's a self-propagating system.
Exactly.
Books, you get to keep making books.
Exactly.
So, Marvel versus DC was absolutely that shotgun marriage of art and commerce, and I was on the art end of it.
Writing is art. No, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the sort of art with a capital A.
Yeah.
Because it was a project designed to be a crowd pleaser, to be a popcorn, summer tentpole movie kind of thing. And, it's what comics do best in a lot of ways. Hey, let's have everybody fight.
Right. And wouldn't that be the model for everything? Little did you know, 20 years later, Civil War kind of reminded everybody, hey, I want to see all my superheroes punch each other. And it looks like we've never really shaken that off. Well,
that's part and parcel of what, in particular, superhero comics do well. Is these are big, bombastic, action spectaculars.
Yeah.
It's not an accident that Jack Kirby is the greatest among us ever.
Mm-hmm.
And he drew a bunch of funny looking people beating the crap out of each other.
That's fair.
On a regular basis. Look, comics are much more than just that, but that's one of the things we do really well. And I think the overall sense of over-the-top action that comics do really well is finally translatable into movies, and that's why we have the Marvel Universe dominating the world the last decade or so.
Yeah.
Technology finally caught up with comics. The digital technology finally caught up with what we've been doing in comics for 50 years.
Yeah, we can finally actually see what Jack Kirby was thinking the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
besides I mean, like, the page, there is something to be said for the page, though. I mean, like, we haven't really come close to what some of the best artists in the business have been able to achieve, I think. Like,
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, comics will always be, a step ahead of whatever is up on the screen, because their comics and film are sort of bastard cousins.
right? It's not one to one. Everybody wanted. I know that, like, you've probably recognized this back in the day. Like, the whole, everybody's like, what movie should they make, or what actor would play this thing? Like, everyone always immediately approximates comic books to movies, maybe because of the storyboard aspect and the fact that comics are essentially like one step in the movie process. But, like, everybody always assumes, man, this comic's great. Wouldn't it make a great movie? And it's like, well, who's to say that movies are the next step up? And it's more like they're a step laterally, like sideways.
Yeah, I see them as completely, they're different animals with a lot of similarities.
That's true. Yeah.
And look, it's not an accident that, like, the coolest moments in Watchmen, for instance, the movie.
Yeah.
The coolest moments from Watchmen are cribbed directly from what Dave Gibbons did on the page.
Completely. Yes.
Like they are basically, those instances are basically filmed panels.
Yes.
Just from the angles that Dave selected and everything. So I think that's just one example that shows you the power of what comics do, and the way that that film really imitates comics still.
Yeah.
I don't, which isn't this. I know that's not to say it's a bad thing.
No.
Or to denigrate what film does at all. Film is obviously the popular medium across the world. Everybody goes to see the new Avengers movie. Not everybody reads the next Avengers issue that comes out.
Yeah.
And that's, and look, do we wish that, the worldwide movie audience was the same? We had the same numbers for comics readership? Sure. But, a lot more people go see a Stephen King movie than read a Stephen King book.
That's very true.
It's just the nature of reading, frankly.
Yeah.
So, they're, like I said, they're bastard cousins. But I think there's still some stuff that comics does even better than films. And I feel like I'd rather get a new Hellboy comic than a new Hellboy movie.
I think everyone else would agree with you based on the numbers.
Well, which isn't to say I don't enjoy the Hellboy movies. I do.
Yeah.
But there's something about what we make in comics that is, to me, for me personally, just a superior experience to any movie or TV show.
Absolutely. Man, apropos movies and comics and the marriage thereof, and then linking it back to you actually being here, you wrote a book that I unabashedly love, and it's one of those crossovers that you're kind of like, why would you do this? And then once you read it, you're like, holy crap. And it's Batman Aliens. I adore that book. I think it has, it's a 50-50 thing, right? It's a really killer alien story. Plus, you also have, of course, the incredible art. Man.
But, that Wrightson guy was okay.
Bernie Wrightson, man. You worked with Bernie Wrightson, like, you had been working with him kind of forever by that point, given your history together. I understand that you, in high school, you interviewed him for your newspaper?
Yeah, a buddy and I went to Bernie's place. I grew up in the Hudson Valley in Kingston, New York. I am a proud Kingston High graduate. And I knew from looking at the local newspaper that, famous artist Bernie Wrightson lived in Woodstock, which was, 15, 20 minutes away from Kingston. And, for the high school newspaper, we went out and arranged to interview Bernie, and he welcomed us to his studio and everything. So I'm like a 17-year-old kid, and we, go to Bernie's studio and interviewed him and did a story on it and everything. And that's how I met him.
Yeah.
And then ended up doing the same thing a few years later for my college newspaper. And we ended up being buddies after that, and he invited me to his Halloween parties, and I just sort of got drawn into that social circle of comic and illustrators, comic artists, writers, and illustrators that lived in the Hudson Valley.
Right.
And that's how I met Jim Starlin, who eventually ushered me into the business. And
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I knew Bernie for, since I was 17, so more than 30 years.
Yeah.
And eventually we just ended up working together on stuff, which obviously is those are kind of pinch me moments.
Yeah.
And it was weird for me because, Bernie and I had been friends forever. And so there was Bernie, my buddy, that we would go have beers and pizza and go watch crappy horror movies together. And we played racquetball a few times a week, even when I was in college. So I had this, these were people that I saw 3-4 times a week and just hung out with. And then there was, oh yeah, that's Bernie Wrightson, who drew Frankenstein and created Swamp Thing. And,
yeah.
So there were like two Bernies really.
Yeah.
And I would have to step back and remind myself of, genius artist Bernie Wrightson. That's the guy I'm, sitting at a bar having a beer with.
Right.
Because, there were no, Bernie was not full of himself in any way. He was not a, he was just a regular guy. He was just, he was just a guy. So when we worked together on stuff, I would be sort of caught between those two things, and reminded that, oh yeah, like he's my buddy, and we're going to go to a diner, and and then we're going to talk about the story that we're going to do, and he's going to, he's going to draw some shit on a napkin, and it's going to boggle my mind.
Totally.
So doing Batman Aliens with Bernie, which was actually a story that I think he and I were coming back from somewhere. It might have been one of the old conventions in New York City. We were riding together, and we ended up kicking around like what we wanted to do. And I think Bernie was the one who suggested, well, what about Batman Aliens? And it was a sort of thing where we didn't think they'd actually do it.
Sure.
But Bernie was friends with Bob Schreck, who was the editor at Dark Horse, who had the Aliens franchise under his wing.
Yeah.
And I eventually got to be really good friends with Bob Schreck, who's, one of the best editors I've ever worked with. So Bernie called Bob and said, hey, what do you think about us doing Batman Aliens? And they jumped all over it.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not delusional enough to think they jumped all over it because my name was attached to it.
I don't know. You were. I mean, you're a pretty big wheel down at the Cracker Factory, so to speak. Like at that point, Ron Marz's name was all over the landscape. I mean, like you could throw a rock and hit Ron Marz. I mean, hopefully, not too hard. But like the fact is,
people did.
But I'm sure it was a feather in the cap.
But we didn't actually think they would do it. And in fairly short order, they being DC and Dark Horse came back and said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And then we were like, oh shit, we got to come up with a story now.
Right.
Because it's easy to say Batman Aliens. And then
totally.
Like, what are you gonna do for 100 pages? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I think, as I recall, we had to go down to the city and meet with Denny O'Neil, who was obviously the Batman editor at the time, and
yep.
we had lunch at Denny's favorite Indian restaurant, not too far from the DC offices. And I don't know, his notes on the whole thing were just like, just make sure Batman doesn't kill anybody. It was very
don't violate
obvious,
the basic
very
tenets
obvious
of the character
stuff. And then he sort of patted us on our heads and sent us on our way.
Yeah.
And there was very little. There was no pushback from 20th Century Fox. There was no pushback from DC. We just kind of got to tell the story we wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And I said to Bernie, like, what do you want to draw? What do you not want to draw?
Right.
And he said, buildings and cars. And I'm like, all right.
We're going to the Aztecs.
All right. No Batmobile. I guess we're going I guess we're gonna go with Mayan Ruins.
Yeah.
And really, the Mayan Ruin stuff came from a trip that I had taken with Jim Starlin and a few other people down to the Yucatan Peninsula to go look at a bunch of Mayan ruins. So
Cool.
that stuff had stuck in my brain, and I really wanted to bring that into the book. So,
Yeah.
it was just the whole experience was such a pleasure. And I know a lot of times I'll get questions about, well, is it difficult to do those things when you've got two publishers and a film
Yeah, because
company?
that's
And yeah, once in a while it is. Once in a while you run into, it's usually somebody that doesn't understand how comics work.
right.
That is an obstacle in the process. But for that one, and for honestly most of the other crossover things that I've done, there's very little, like once you sort of get over the hurdle that the people you're working with think you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
they generally leave you alone.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, like, the nitty gritty of the crossover is something that I think a lot of people either take for granted or don't get at all, and I'm among both of those categories, and I'd love to get a little bit more inside baseball about that, because right now, you're in this world, like, okay, so DC versus Marvel ushers in this era of crossovers. You got like nonstop crossovers. I mean, DC and Dark Horse had a very long-standing relationship to the point where you have like recently printed trades that collect all of them. And so you have like some crossover companies that are hand in hand. DC and Dark Horse, pretty much, there are very few obstacles except for creative that get in the way. But with respect to the like Marvel and DC stuff, you saw a ton of that stuff for a good couple of years. Like for a good like 5 or 6 years, there were crossovers, like sequels to crossover. Batman, Daredevil, 2 of those. Spider-Man, Batman. You got GL Silver Surfer, which by the way, you wrote. Not only was it baller, but also like, hey, did you ever want to do another one? And how come we never got one?
A lot of times, well, some inside baseball stuff. A lot of times, the way that those worked is that the companies would agree to do 2 of them, and they would each do one, and each reap the benefits of one.
Okay, now when you say reap the benefits, because we got to talk about sales, and I don't want to get you in trouble, so feel free to leave anything out or any details or anything like that. But like when it comes to sales, is it 50-50? Or is it more like if there are 2 of them, DC publishes one, takes 100% of the profits, and then Marvel publishes one, takes 100% of the profits, that kind of thing?
It depends on how the deal is set up. But a lot of times when you see like two different, Punisher, Batman,
right? Exactly.
You'll see, one will sort of be an obvious Marvel book, and one will sort of be an obvious DC book.
You can definitely see the difference. Also, I think they switched the logos like on the cover, so it's like whoever goes first is probably their book.
And usually that's an indication that they agreed to do 2 projects, and Marvel handles one editorially and reaps the and benefits from the sales of that.
Okay.
And then DC does its own and benefits from the sales of that.
Okay.
For like when we did Marvel versus DC, the issues were split as to who was handling them editorially.
Yeah.
And I think I was the, it was all sort of mixed together really, but I think I was the DC guy and Peter David was the Marvel guy in terms of who we were actually working for.
Okay.
Like who paid us.
Right.
So and it was all, Mike Carlin was the DC editor and Mark Grunwald was the Marvel editor that were in charge of those projects, and those guys were best friends. So so it was a very smooth process. But in terms of how it was split up, Marvel and DC sort of handled their own stuff, and the liaison from one to the other was Carlin and Grunwald, and they and also the like the Amalgam books were split down the middle.
Yeah, the Amalgam books are everyone loves the Amalgam books, or at least I was actually not a big fan of the Amalgam books. I was like, what even is this? Like when I remember when it came out, I'm like, right on, DC versus Marvel, I'm in. I want to read this. Then the amalgam twist happens, and I'm like, what even is this? And then they all came out. And I'm like, what has happened? Like, it was just, there was no, because no internet, no, like, even Wizard didn't have a thing about it. And so we're all just kind of like left to, is this the future now? Are we just living in this? Like, is Bruce Wayne just going to be an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. forever? Like, but now that you think about it, not only is it kind of an amazing achievement in publishing cohesion and synergy, but like, who even thought of that? Like, where did it even come from?
Well, that was, I mean, again, that was Carlin and Grunwald.
Really?
Who were both like huge nerds. And like I said, best friends. Mike started his comics career at Marvel and then moved over to DC. And obviously Mark was a Marvel guy his whole career. That was kind of the other shoe dropping in the whole process. Because, and I've told the story before, the initial meeting for Marvel versus DC was held at Mark Grunwald's apartment uptown in Manhattan, because they didn't want us in the office talking about this. They didn't want us seen in the office and for anybody to figure out what was going on, because this was entirely top secret. The respective staffs at Marvel and DC didn't even know we were doing it for a while. So we had the meeting at Mark's apartment, and it's Marvel versus DC. So you pretty much expect, well, Superman's going to fight the Hulk and Batman's going to fight Captain America. So give the people what they want. And then we got to, all right, and, between issue 3 and 4, this is what's going to happen. And that's when Mike and Mark told us about the amalgam concept, and that we're going to do a dozen books, smashing both universes together. Yeah. And I can remember sitting there slack-jawed thinking, oh my God, we're really going to do this. Yeah. It just seemed nuts, like in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
So obviously, like they already had the books figured out. They already had the characters figured out.
Okay.
Which I assume was just the two of them sitting down and
it has to. I mean,
making it up.
Purely aesthetic. Like you have to assume that it was just, I want to see Storm in a Wonder Woman costume. I want to see Batman with claws, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was, and most of them were obvious. And when they got to Strange Fate, I said, well, I'm doing that one.
Yes. Now the Strange Fate thing, I love it because it's a hodgepodge of Dr. Fate and Dr. Strange, but then the big reveal is that it's neither of those guys.
Yeah, well, the big reveal was what, like, I wanted to do that from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't part of the initial concept. The initial concept was Doctor Strange and Dr. Fate.
Right.
And there wasn't really much thought to who was under the mask.
Sure, yeah, because it makes sense. Like, it would have to be someone's head.
Yeah. So as we got into it, I said, well, like, I want the person under the mask to be neither Strange or Fate. I want it to be somebody different, so there's a surprise at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I had always loved the old X-Men, the Byrne, Claremont, Austin stuff, with Charles Xavier in Cairo, being kind of bald Indiana Jones for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I thought that really plugged into a lot of the Dr. Fate backstory. So I was like, let's have it be Charles Xavier. And it went weeks before we could actually get Marvel to sign off on that.
Really?
Yeah, it was. There's so over there in my office, hangs the original last page by Garcia Lopez
I was
and
gonna
Kevin.
say, yeah.
Of the helmet coming off and Charles Xavier being revealed. So I actually have the original framed on the wall over there.
That's awesome. That may be the best page of the book.
Because I'm cool that way. And one of the reasons that reveal takes place on the last page of the book, in addition to the fact that that's just dramatically where it belongs.
Sure.
One of the reasons is that the issue was written before we got permission for it to be Charles Xavier. So that page was obviously last to be drawn because we didn't get the permission for the actual reveal until we were pretty far into the book. So
now, why Resistance? If not to interrupt, I'm sorry, but
well, because I think part of it was that X-Men, X-Men ruled the world at that point in terms of comic sales.
Yeah.
That was, X-Men was a bigger deal than Batman or Superman or anyone.
Yeah.
Frankly. So so Marvel was very picky about how and where any of the X-Men characters got used in any of this stuff.
Okay.
Which from a sales
sure,
certainly understand. So it took a while for that to get approved, and when it finally did, I was like, "Cool! That helmet's gonna come off, and there's gonna be a bald dude under there."
Yeah.
So so I have that lovely page framed on the wall.
Yeah.
And certainly one of my favorite art jobs that I've ever been involved in, and I think I've told this story before too, that was frankly the only time in my career that I was actually scared to write a script, because I was working with Garcia Lopez.
Yeah, man.
And that dude's brilliant. So
yeah,
like I had to write something worthy of Garcia Lopez, or he would scrape me off the bottom of his shoe like the slug that I am. And so it took me a couple of weeks of just not just spinning my wheels, not getting anything done on the script, because I was so concerned about making sure that it was worthy of the the art team I was working with.
Sure, yeah.
And then it kind of dawned on me that I could write anything, and it was going to look amazing because Garcia Lopez and Kevin Nolan were drawing it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, I basically gave myself permission to suck at that point.
Sure.
And then just like sat down and wrote the entire script in 2 days. So
nice.
So yeah, like I just had to wrap my head around the fact that, man, no matter what I did, I was gonna, I was gonna look like a genius because of the dudes who were drawing the story.
I will say, I think Doctor Strange Fate may be one of the best of the Amalgam run.
Well, it was fun for me because I could blend elements of the Marvel versus DC stuff, the plot line really, into that storyline.
Yeah, it's one of the only ones that actually connects to the story and actually utilizes that Access character.
Yeah, it was designed to do that. And actually, when we actually did a trade paperback collection of the whole story, the Strange Fate book is in the trade paperback collection.
Oh, cool.
So obviously there's no agreement to continue producing trade paperbacks or collections or whatever.
I don't think there's been a printing of that in 15 years more.
Yeah, well, obviously I had like, a case of a couple dozen copies, and I had, for years I had just been giving them out to like kids and stuff that would stop over at the house, and now I think I have like one left.
Man.
So and they go for like crazy money on eBay. So
yeah, well, because there's like seemingly no plan to reprint them.
Well, look, hopefully someday everybody comes to the table and says, okay, well, we might as well, there would be great to do a big Marvel versus DC library with all the different crossovers in it. Because like you said, for a while there, it was just a sort of commonplace.
That's the thing. It felt like it was a thing that you kind of you could take for granted, where it's like, oh, well, they'll get to that eventually. They did Superman Fantastic Four. They'll eventually do it all. And then it just kind of stopped. And then you had a big gap. Then they did JLA Avengers. And the era we're in right now, and I've talked about this on a number of shows, this is the longest gap between Marvel DC crossovers. It's been 17 years since the last one. And
well, for so long, when we did Marvel versus DC stuff or Marvel DC crossovers, it was just comics,
right?
And now it's not just comics. Now these are all sort of multi-billion-dollar media properties.
Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing by any means. Obviously, that
helps everybody else.
That's like wonderful. That's a wonderful development in what these characters and properties have become.
Yeah.
But the fact that we're not just doing comics, the fact that these are completely worldwide brands now makes the makes it a lot more difficult to put that kind of deal together.
It's,
And hopefully at some point it will, and we'll get the old stuff back into print and do some new stuff.
I think at least the old stuff, if not new stuff, because like we're in a place where it's harmless to put out something that has been produced, that is well regarded, and that would sell. And that I think that's like, at the end of the day, that's the carrot, right? Like that's the big, for me, at least in my understanding of the industry, it's like, you know, when you put "and it'll sell" at the end of it, you'll probably have a higher likelihood of actually getting greenlit. Because
and certainly, you know, sales mean different things to different companies, and you know, these are Marvel and DC are obviously IP farms
right.
in addition to being publishers, which is you know, that's not at all a bad thing to say. I mean, it's
not incorrect.
These IP farms. But, you know, again, especially with what the industry is facing right now in terms of where we're going to sell our product, something that gets people excited, something that gets people back into stores when the stores can open their doors again, and something that that will put dollars in local comic shop cash registers.
Right.
It's obviously good.
Yeah.
So, you know, who knows where it'll go, but fingers crossed. I think we can, you know, there are tools in place to do some good.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's funny because, you know, we've talked about how we can get these things, like how a rising tide raises all ships, right?
Sure.
Like you get everybody together, you get them in comic shops, you're going to get everybody paid. In terms of the industry itself and where it's headed, because you touched on where we are right now, because, you know, if you're watching this a couple years from now, I apologize, but right now we're in this very, very interesting period. It's scary, it's horrible, and it's you know, terrifying, but also very fascinating if you're looking at it from like a, you know, an anthropologist's perspective, you know, where you're like, okay, so right now there are no comic shops open or selling new books. The big two and independent publishers are not producing books. In fact, only Marvel and DC have greenlit new books being produced. They're just not being printed or sent anywhere. And you have a marketplace that you could sell them in digital arenas or stores. Nowhere. Is this the shakeup? Like, is this the moment where comics are gonna, for lack of a better term, grow up? Where it's like they're going to go, you know what, maybe one distribution model, like you said, is not the way to go. Or maybe we need to take more seriously the alternate distribution models.
Well, I think, you know, God, we could spend days talking about
I have
now and where, you know, and where we think it's going. And ultimately, I don't know that anybody knows where it's going, including the publishers.
I think you're right.
This is such untested ground, and really came about so suddenly that I don't think anybody really knows what the right answers are.
No.
I'm not sure anybody even knows what the questions are.
Right.
But, you know, for right now, the bigger publishers are like, yeah, keep going on whatever assignments you are in front of you.
Yeah.
Smaller publishers are like, wait a minute.
If no one can buy them, why are we making them? Like,
yeah, like we don't know what's going to happen, so let's put a pause on things.
Yeah.
It's interesting that some of the stuff that I'm working on is original graphic novel stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not affected at all. You know, it's just you know, Rick Leonardi and I are doing an original graphic novel that. Of about 150 pages that has not been announced yet.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's cool, and it's not affected in any way. Just keep going, because it's, you know, we're doing a book. We're not doing a periodical. We're not carving it up into 20-page chunks and putting it out in pamphlets.
So that's definitely shots fired at the monthly singles format.
No,
I think
not even shots fired. It's just a different format. I think one of the things that comics is facing is that essentially we as an industry produce books, but we sell them as periodicals.
Right. You're absolutely right about that.
And I'm not even like like I think of the market and how we sell these books. It's a big pie,
Yeah.
and all of the slices are necessary to make up the pie. And
Okay.
it's monthly comics, it's collected editions, it's original graphic novels, it's digital. We need all of it. And
Yeah.
comics, last year again set a sales record in terms of dollars.
True.
But the market is expanding to people who didn't used to read comics at all.
Yeah.
And people who are discovering comics now, I think by and large, do not go to the comic shop um, and pick up their books every week.
No,
I
I think
think
you're right.
they go to a Barnes and Noble, or they go to a comic shop and get a collection.
Yep.
They read digitally. So I think more and more of what the industry is doing is trending towards books rather than periodicals. It's not an accident that DC invested a large chunk of capital and a large chunk of capital and time and energy into doing original graphic novels, and specifically original graphic novels for a YA audience.
Yeah. That's the sweetest plum right now, because like there are books that are produced essentially to become original graphic novels. Like we're just like, hey, can we get two slices of the same pie, right? Like,
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So I think what's going on right now is maybe going to hasten some of that direction to producing stuff as an OGN,
yeah,
because that's what more of the market is looking at.
yeah,
But financially, that's also a large outlay of cash for the publisher to make, for the creative team to actually do the work.
yeah,
If you have to pay for 100 pages worth of material before you ever see dime one, you need fairly deep pockets um, to actually pay for that
true.
before the book gets into the distribution system. So
Yeah.
it's a different financial model than a lot of publishers use in the direct market.
Well, and
The direct market.
I think that's why we have such a divisive niche audience reading them, because it takes kind of effort to even understand it. Like if you were to say to somebody, yeah, we made this movie, right? And it cost this much to produce, and I'm going to release it about 30 minutes at a time. And by the way, if you don't buy each 30-minute chunk of the movie, we're not going to finish the movie.
Yeah, it's look, in a lot of ways it's an antiquated model. And I think we're always going to produce monthly comics to one extent or the other.
Yeah.
But it's an antiquated model financially, and it's an antiquated model in terms of what the audience wants. We're a binge society now.
Yes.
We want the whole thing right now, put it in front of me.
Right.
And like you said, you can't tell the audience, we're going to give you a chunk of the story and come back in a month.
Right. I mean,
yeah. I mean, part of the audience gets pissed off now with stuff like The Mandalorian coming out weekly,
yeah,
rather than give me the whole thing right now.
Right. That being said, though, I think that was the right amount of delay for The Mandalorian.
Oh, absolutely. I agree completely from the standpoint of personally not having the time to sit down and watch 8 episodes in a row.
Right.
Watching one a week is actually, I think, pretty great, and it also extends the life of the thing that you're doing. Over 2 months. People are excited for 2 months rather than for a weekend.
Well, it's brilliant in a number of ways, and I think one of them that we need to really isolate is it's also just purely excellent. And that's the kind of thing where, like, if you look at like the Marvel shows from Netflix, you can't deny that care, effort, and love was put into pretty much every one of those shows except maybe one, and maybe 2. And the fact is, there were too many episodes, I think, and if they had spaced them out, if they had done the same thing if they just literally done the same thing as Mandalorian with what they had, right, 13 episodes per show, 1 week apart, all those shows would have died. because there were a couple of lulls, there were a couple of slow parts. It wasn't always excellent.
Well, the Mandalorian really struck me, and maybe because I grew up when there was network TV, and you had to wait once a week to see your thing.
Yeah.
But the Mandalorian struck me as basically like a 1950s Western TV series that just happened to be set in space.
Right.
And it had those rhythms to it. So I think that every episode being, for the most part, somewhere different, and then sort of tying it all up at the end, just really worked very well in terms of how the audience responded to it. I think about, like, obviously right now everybody's home, everybody's binging stuff. Everybody's talking about, well, did Carol Baskin kill her husband or not?
Right. Yeah, that's the big conversation of the day.
Because we all binged that show over a weekend.
Right.
In 2 weeks, nobody's going to be talking about it.
No.
Because it's going to be gone.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to have the long-lasting impact that something like The Mandalorian does. And certainly they're by far different storytelling experiences.
Sure.
But I kind of like that old school model of you get one a week and then you got to wait a week.
Yeah.
I think a week feels like it's an okay time frame.
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, if to make the comics analogy, if we were putting out books every week that continue the storyline, I think the audience would come along for it.
Absolutely.
If we're putting out books once a month, which is frankly, I was going to say, which is what the production schedule can do, and frankly, the production schedule really can't handle monthly books.
No, and now we're in bi-monthly with most of these like top tier books, and it's like you're overworking your artists. You're expecting like double time. I think it's unsustainable.
It's tough. The math really doesn't work in terms of the art. Everything revolves around the art because it's a visual medium and somebody's got to draw these things.
That's the reality. Like, it doesn't matter how good the story is. If the art isn't up to snuff, or if it's just lower quality, it's going to devalue the entire work.
Oh yeah, by far. I can write the best script in the world, and if they hand it to somebody that doesn't, to an artist that doesn't know what he or she is doing, it's going to fail. My story sucks at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And if I write a mediocre story and they give it to, say, Garcia Lopez and Kevin Nolan to draw, I'm a genius at the end of the day, no matter what happens.
Exactly. Yeah. So it feels like the thing that blows my mind right now in this very uncertain and desperate time, I think, is that when you entered the comic industry in like 89, I'm sure they were talking about how it was dying.
Oh yeah, comics has been dying for every year that I've been in the business.
Right? And sometimes it's hyperbole, and sometimes, like in the 90s, maybe they were kind of right. And I don't mean like it was bad. I just mean like there were desperate times. Marvel went bankrupt. DC got. DC was being outsold by Image. They were desperate times. But if you are at the helm and you are told that there's a hole in your boat, at some point or another, you probably want to draw up a plan to plug the hole. And to imagine that the comic book industry right now is faced with these surprises that threaten the industry, or at the very least the distribution model, and to tell me that they're caught with their pants down, I think is ridiculous, because it means that they've never been planning any, like, am I really so naive to think that they didn't have any plan in place to deal with if Diamond were to, let's say, collapse, or if comic book stores went out of business?
Well, I think to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, nobody expected, obviously, this. Nobody expected this to...
No, not this specifically.
But, I think there are it's been such a stable ecosystem in terms of
Mm.
how books are sold. That
Well,
I just don't.
predictable, certainly.
Yeah, you sort of this is how we do. This is how it works,
Right.
and you look to expand from that. You look to, sell OGNs into box stores, and you
Right.
look and because look, despite the initiative to get 100-page books into Walmart, which I thought
Yeah.
was great,
I think it was a great idea too, but it
uh,
just didn't work.
but ultimately comics are not a great sort of point of purchase product in stores where people aren't specifically looking for comics.
Right. Right.
There's a lot
Okay.
of damages to the product. There's it's a for the product to take up shelf space at $5 a pop. Um, retailers who are not comics retailers
Right.
are not going to be falling all over themselves um, to stock a product that only makes them $5 a pop,
Right.
and you get a lot of damages and you can't sell them, and it's a tricky proposition. Selling a book that you can rack on a shelf and cost 20 or $25 is a lot more enticing to a non-traditional comic shop retailer.
Right.
So again, I think more of what we do is going to trend in that direction. Um, but obviously, like you said, there's a hole in the boat right now. Obviously, the main thing now is to get comic shops, which are by far the backbone of the industry. I mean, that's where the sure money for publishers comes from. Because
Right.
once a publisher sells its product to Diamond sells it to local comic shops, and the local comic shops own those books.
Right.
If somebody decides they want 5,000 copies of Batman, he owns 5,000 copies of that Batman issue.
Exactly.
There's no sending them back to DC and saying, I only sold 40. I'd like to send the rest back.
Right.
That's not the way this works.
Well, but the comic book retailer certainly holds them accountable for their product, and whenever you hear a comic shop merchant, musing or complaining about their woes, it's usually the publisher's fault because they didn't do XYZ, and it's like, well, you were on the hook to order them. Like you're on your honor to kind of figure out how what to order, how much to order, but the publishers also, you never know whether they're going to introduce a new Harley Quinn type character and it's going to be a crazy seller. And
yeah, it's an imperfect model, certainly.
Yeah.
Because the almost the entirety of the sales risk goes to the local shop.
Yeah.
And the local shop has to be pretty smart in how it orders.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of times you'll see a shop that gets it. Again, I'll just use Batman because it's an easy example.
It's a good example because it's like the top selling book every month.
Yeah. So if a store gets in 50 copies of Batman for the week and sells 48 of them by the weekend,
yeah,
man, that owner's happy because he's
definitely
not stuck with back stock. However, for the next three weeks, if people come in and look for, want a copy of that issue of Batman, that owner doesn't have them. Like, so he's lost out on sales. He's happy because he sold everything that he invested.
Yeah.
But he's also losing out on sales that he can't make now because he didn't have enough copies.
Right.
So again, it's an imperfect model, and sort of that retailer, if he goes, well, I sold 50 copies of Batman, maybe next time I'll order 52 copies and see how that goes. There's not an incentive. There's not a lot of incentive for a retailer to go big on something.
No.
And there's a lot of risk involved.
That's right.
So you'll see, I sold 50 copies this month. I'll order 55 for next month.
Right.
So sales, and that's why the normal sales model in comics is attrition. And one of the things that, certainly on the publisher end, one of the things that is very true has been true for as long as I've been in the business, is the best way to lose sales is just do a solid monthly book.
Really?
Because attrition is, people wander away, or people, have people come in to spend, $20 a week on comics.
Yeah.
And, if you're producing issue 37 of whatever title it is, and there's a hot new number one that people are interested in, they're probably going to put their money in the hot new number one, rather than just continuing to buy the solid book that they generally enjoy every month, but maybe, it's like seeing a prettier girl on the other side of the street.
Right.
So that's why, we're in a cycle of titles relaunching.
Yes. Well, I mean, and when
because that number one issue and the chance to attract a new reader with a number one issue and a new team is one of the only tools we have to get the audience interested in.
That sounds like a broken system to me. If it's like, if all I can rely on to shore up sales on a consistent basis and stay in business is to constantly upend the table and upset the apple cart.
Yeah, it's a spiraling cycle.
Because can you imagine? I don't mean to interrupt, but like, can you imagine if The Mandalorian, great show, incredible format. Can you imagine if they were like, next season they just completely betray the model and go, well, we got to keep people interested, so we're gonna make them do all kinds of, we're gonna bring back Darth Vader, and we're gonna, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna do things
let's recast everybody, and
like we're gonna
start
from scratch because we gotta have fresh new viewers on this show. Like, no, the thing that everybody would say to do with a shore show, like the death of every show that is from like network TV is when they introduce the kid, or they divorce, or when like, Bruce Willis and whoever like break up. I'm using a very old reference, but like, but like it's just make a consistent product and they'll continue to buy the book or watch the show. I feel like that should be the model. And if it isn't the model, then maybe there's something wrong with what we're doing here. I don't know what it is. It just feels kind of like disingenuous. I don't know. Not to.
Well, I don't look. If I had the answer, I would be.
That's fair.
I would be. I'd be kind of a genius.
Right.
It's the model is broken in some respects, but it still works in others. Having a big sort of upend the table moment that's going on right now in the direct market, like this, I think is gonna cause the industry as a whole to kind of reconsider how we're doing this, and
I hope so. I mean,
it's I don't think it's fair to cast Diamond as a villain, really.
Right.
It's not their fault that they're a monopoly.
Well,
right?
Because how can you blame them, right? Like they're a business, they're in charge of their business. They took, the funny thing is, of course, like, you can't blame, you can't demonize them, but at the same time, I also don't really have much sympathy. It's like, whereas if you are a monopoly and you arrange things to become a monopoly, if you can't be sustainable after 1 week of no sales, maybe you didn't deserve to be a monopoly in the first place.
Well, look, comics are a very close to the bone business for everybody.
Always been down to the wire
for everybody involved. So when you have something like this that really knocks everybody off balance, it's really damaging.
That's true.
When this is sort of your operating paradigm that you've always been used to, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
Everybody's scrambling to come up with, okay, what's our, first, what's the Band-Aid? And then, okay, what's the more long-term fix? And again,
right.
I'd be lying if I said I knew.
True, yeah.
But it's gonna take everybody. We can't all be pulling at the oars in different directions.
No, that's true.
It's got to be pulling in one direction. So it's a sense of, Band-Aid for now to stop the bleeding, and then
Right.
and then hopefully we get to the point where there's a concerted effort to fix some of the gaps in the system.
Yeah, because I think that, and I think there's a genuine effort to do that. I know that like the efforts that at the time of this recording, the big two publishers at least are doing exactly what you're saying. It's let's stop the bleeding now, and then we will come up with a solution later. And I don't think they're gonna cut out Diamond. I think that, Diamond is hurting, but Diamond is also the infrastructure in place. I used to pitch the idea of like, hey, didn't Marvel and DC used to distribute themselves? Like, why don't they do that again? But, it's been 25, 35 years of one distributor and them not doing it. So it would not be a simple matter of saying, okay, yeah, Marvel and DC are just going to distribute their books from now on. It's going to be like, it would require them to completely rebuild their own infrastructure and hire people and come up with a whole new system. Like, and they're not going to do that because
right now, obviously the job number one is to,
sell books.
Just right the ship, have a way to get books into people's hands. And again, it's going to be hopefully everybody pulling in the same direction. I think this really kind of stunned so many people. I think we're still in
shock.
Everybody's kind of dazed.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it's gonna take some. I think publishers are coming up with what their are coming up with what their own reaction is going to be.
Right.
Okay. What do we do? What do we do for our customers, which are which is Diamond /
local comic shops.
Diamond's customers, the local comic shop. What are we going to do about that? And what are we going to do about the people that are on staff? And what are we going to do about people that are freelancers?
Right.
Have we told them to not work for a month till we figure out what's going on, which is, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
Or are we, can we continue to pay them even though we're not getting funds from Diamond?
Yeah.
The way the market is set up is, the books, the shops sell the books and they pay Diamond, and Diamond gets those funds and they pay the publishers, and the publishers get those funds and then they pay the freelancers and their staff.
Right.
So it's absolutely an ecosystem where if one of the links in that chain falls apart, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, that's the thing that people like myself probably discount, is that like it is entirely we're all connected. It is all connected, and even people on my end are feeling it. I was talking to a friend of mine and a colleague who we make our living on comic books and discussing comic books or covering comic books, and when there are no new books, there are no new viewers. Like, the viewers are interested in the new turnover and the new books, and and if there are no new books, your writers, your artists aren't getting paid, Dime's not getting paid, local comic shops aren't getting paid. Like, no one's doing well. And so it's interesting to see, like, if you remove one element, the whole thing comes apart.
Yeah, it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's been certainly on Twitter and people are talking about is, look, if you can put a couple of bucks into your retailer's pocket,
all the better.
While they're not getting new product, do that. If there are no new books, there are at least new to you books.
Yeah.
There's that trade collection or that artist edition that you've been holding off on purchasing. Now's the time to get it.
Right.
If you're at all able. Although obviously, look,
everyone's kind of feeling the pinch
for everybody. Are you still gainfully employed? And the answer is different for a lot of different people.
Yeah.
I think the uncertainty of all this is what's really sort of ratcheting up the anxiety on everybody.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Is, you don't know what your job future is going to be. You don't know if you're going to go out into, the grocery store and contact the virus.
That's the thing.
And if you do, how bad is it going to be? It's just the uncertainty, I think, is what is so draining on people.
Yeah.
And I think I draw the conclusion when I was at CrossGen and we lived in Florida. We had hurricanes roll through.
Yeah.
Because of course it is Florida.
Right.
And the uncertainty of where the hurricane was going to go, was it going to hit your area or was it going to slam somewhere else on the peninsula? That was always much worse than when the actual hurricane showed up.
Huh.
The uncertainty was just really anxiety laden.
Yeah.
Once you knew what was going to happen one way or the other, you could deal with it. But
Sure.
that period of, is the hurricane going to roll right up Tampa Bay and over my house, or is it going to go in? Is it going to take an abrupt right turn and make somebody else's life miserable? An hour away.
Yeah.
That's what I think of in these times of uncertainty when you're dealing with these anxiety producing events. Is the not knowing is a lot worse than the knowing.
Yeah, because you're trying to predict the unpredictable, and you're trying to counter it. And like I can imagine with CrossGen back then, preparing for the hurricane, you're like, okay, well, should we stop production? Should we move offices? How are we gonna, you know what I mean? Like, it's just constantly in flux, and it's very paralleling with what we're doing now.
You could do. Yeah, I remember going through that a few times, and like everybody's computers went up on their desks. Everybody, like anything that you didn't want to maybe get wet from flooding.
Yeah.
Had to go up 3 feet.
Yeah.
And then the weekend after the hurricane passed and the office didn't flood,
you went back to work.
Came in and put everything back down. You sort of went back to normal. But that not knowing of that period of not knowing what sort of precautions were necessary was always the worst.
Yeah. That's actually really insightful because it allows. I think it informs where we are now because for many of us, myself included, it's kind of like, oh, this is unprecedented. Maybe it's throwing everything into tumult. Who knows where the future is going to be? And maybe it's just the worst of it is the reaction.
I think and the only reason I have any sensibility for that is that those hurricane experiences where you were constantly listening to the watching TV, listening to the radio, online, trying to get information about what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think we're in the same exact boat right now with the coronavirus. Is what's going to happen? How much worse is it going to get? Where are the next outbreak centers? What am I supposed to be doing? I think that sort of overload of information can really be damaging after a certain point.
Definitely.
The fact that you're constantly updating the web, updating Twitter to find out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Becomes this sort of feedback loop of anxiety.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we wrap up, you teased a project with Rick Leonardi. Can you tease any more?
About that one specifically, or just in general?
Well, what's happening in the world of Ron Marz, and what can we get next, man?
Let's see. We have that OGN from Rick Leonardi, which I can't tell you what publisher.
Okay.
Because it hasn't been announced yet, and publishers sort of
would
guard that stuff jealously.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Let's see. What else have I got going? There's a number of things that I'm doing that I can't talk about because they're not announced yet.
Okay. So the headline is just Rick. See, Ron Marz is working. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's not like I ever get up in the morning and don't know what to do.
No, yeah.
I mean, the biggest chunk of my job is still I'm editor in chief of Ominous Press, and we're doing projects. We've got the Kickstarter for the Demigod trade paperback is this is the last week it'll be live, and we need I don't know, a couple $1,000, something like that, to hit the printing goal. All the work is done.
Yeah.
We have some more projects in the in the wings, as they say, that we'll be announcing and getting out onto Kickstarter platforms or Indiegogo within the next month or 2 months.
Yeah.
Some cool stuff coming. I just turned in the Green Lantern 80th anniversary story that Darryl Banks is drawing, which the first few pages have come back and they just look amazing.
Awesome.
Darryl and I did a graphic novel called Harkin's Raiders, which is a World War II story that we did through Ominous, which is complete. It's in a hardcover, it's oversized hardcover format, sort of like a European album format.
Oh, cool.
So it was, yeah. When you're the editor in chief, you can sort of
you can green like that.
You can campaign for the format that you really want to do it in. So
Yeah.
I really like, again, to sort of stray back to that discussion of original graphic novels and publishing comics as books rather than periodicals.
Yeah.
We did a decent chunk of story in a hardcover. Here it is. It's one and done. You get your money's worth out of the thing right out of the gate.
Yeah. So appealing.
So yeah, and I'm not immune to sort of trying to publish the kind of books that I like to read. It's and when you have platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, you can do that.
Right.
And certainly, so that's one end of what we do at Ominous, and there's there are other irons in the fire as well. So I never, like I said, I never sort of scratch my head and wonder what to do when I get up in the morning. There's always something to do, and stories are being written and stories are being edited, and we'll announce them over the next few months as we all hang through this together.
Nice. Well, Ron, thank you so much for being here, man. Thank you so much for talking with us and for giving us a great insight into where we are, where we're going, where we've been, and a little bit of inside baseball. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good, man. Happy to do it. Let's do it again.
Definitely. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot for listening and watching, and we'll see you guys then. I'm Sal, and that was Ron Marz. So long, everybody.